During the first phase of the Civil War, luck favored the Confederates. They managed not only to repulse all attacks on Richmond, but also to organize an attack on Washington. Despite this, the Northerners did not plan to surrender. Thanks to the adoption of the law on the abolition of slavery, the United States received the approval of all the great powers, thereby eliminating the possibility of recognizing the independence of the Confederation on their part. Having solved the problems in the international arena, the United States was able to focus its efforts on the fight against the Confederation. In January 1863, General Hooker was appointed the new commander of the Federal Army, who immediately began planning a new attack on Richmond, but unlike his predecessors, he decided to use maneuvering tactics. Having gathered an impressive army of 130,000 soldiers, Hooker launched an offensive against the capital of the Confederation. In May 1863, the U.S. Army clashed with a Confederate army of about 60,000 soldiers under the command of General Lee in a battle near the city of Chancellorsville. In this battle, the Southerners for the first time used loose formation, thanks to which they managed to inflict a crushing defeat on the numerically superior enemy. Despite the victory, this battle weakened the Confederate army, as General Jackson died in it. Meanwhile, an army of Northerners under the command of General Grant, which was advancing on the Western Front, laid siege to the city of Vicksburg. Taking advantage of the victory, General Lee decided to launch an offensive against Washington in order to defeat the U.S. Army and then impose a peace treaty on the enemy. By June, the Confederates managed to muster an impressive army of more than 70,000 soldiers and begin active operations. The Confederate army advanced swiftly bypassed Washington from the north, planning to lure out the Northern Army and defeat it in battle. In the meantime, George Meade was appointed the new commander of the Army of the Federation. The battle between took place near the city of Gettysburg on July 1, 1863. General Lee had about 72,000 soldiers at his disposal, and the size of the U.S. Army under the command of General Meade was about 94,000 soldiers. At 5 o'clock in the morning, 2 brigades of Southerners under the command of Davis and Archer, who were instructed by General Hill to carry out reconnaissance in force, reached the vicinity of Gettysburg. In the meantime, the Northerners managed to prepare well for the upcoming battle by setting up pickets and organizing 2 lines of defense. Rapidly advancing, the Southerners defeated the furthest picket of the Northerners on the Ridge, after which they continued to move towards the city of Gettysburg. Meanwhile, the Northerners hastily took up positions on the Chambersburg Road, so as not to let the enemy into the city. Having reached the positions of the Northerners, the Southerners immediately launched an attack. During the battle, Davis's brigade managed to outflank the enemy position from the right flank. Finding themselves in a disadvantageous position, the detachments of the Northerners began to retreat to the city. In turn, Davis, having taken the positions of the enemy, divided his brigade into 2 parts, one of which he sent to the railway, and the second to attack the positions of the Federal troops located on the Seminary Ridge. At this time, Archer's brigade attacked the enemy positions on McPherson Ridge. Due to the numerical advantage, the Northerners managed to strike at the flank of the attacking Confederate infantry. Unable to withstand the flank attack of the Northerners, the Confederates faltered and began to retreat, and Archer himself was captured. Meanwhile, the Northerners deployed additional forces planning to destroy the Davis Brigade. Taking advantage of the numerical superiority, the Northerners were able to surround the Davis Brigade, forcing it to take up a deft defense. In the end, part of Davis's brigade retreated to the ridge of Ridge, and the second part was taken prisoner. By 12 noon, a temporary lull formed on the battlefield, as the Southerners were waiting for the arrival of the main forces. Meanwhile, the Northerners also brought up fresh forces and strengthened their positions. In the afternoon, the Southerners attacked the center of the Northerners' position, but, having fallen under heavy fire, they could not push the enemy back. An intense gunfight began. In the end, the Confederates managed to drive the troops of the Northerners from the Oak Ridge. At about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the Southerners launched an attack on the right and left flanks of the Northerners. On the left flank, luck was on the side of the Northerners, who stood in positions convenient for defense. They were able to withstand the onslaught of the Southerners, having suffered serious losses, were forced to retreat. On the right flank of the defense of Gettysburg, the situation was in favor of the Southerners. The Northerners could not withstand the onslaught of the enemy and were forced to retreat to the city. After the retreat of the right flank of the Northerners, the Southerners increased their pressure on the left flank and center of the enemy army. In the end, the Northerners faltered and began a retreat, which only thanks to the competent actions of the command did not turn into a flight. By the end of the day, Gettysburg fell into the hands of the Southerners, and the Northerners took up defensive positions south of the city near the cemetery. Throughout the evening, as well as the next morning, the Northerners and Southerners received reinforcements. General Lee, not knowing that he was facing the entire Federal Army, was counting on an easy victory. He planned to break the enemy with a double flank attack, as well as a diversionary attack on the center of the Federal positions. According to General Lee's plan, the joint attack of all parts of the Army of the Southerners was to begin at 9 in the morning. But by 12 o'clock in the afternoon, he learned that the detachments of General Longstreet, who were supposed to attack the enemy's left flank, had not yet advanced to their positions. Having received a direct order to move into position for a subsequent attack, Longstreet ordered his men to start moving. Due to delays in the journey and Longstreet's slowness, his men were not able to get into position for the upcoming attack until 4 o'clock in the evening. All this time, the Northerners hastily strengthened their defensive positions. The Confederate attack began at 4 o'clock in the evening. Rapidly advancing, the Confederates reached the positions of the Northerners. A fierce gunfight began. By the end of the day, Longstreet's men succeeded in driving the Northerners from their positions in the Devil's Lair and in the Peach Orchard. The attacks of the Southerners on the right flank and center of the enemy were unsuccessful, since the Confederates simply could not dislodge the Northerners from their fortified position. Which is why they had to retreat. By the evening of July 2nd, it became clear that the Confederate flank attacks had not brought the desired result, so General Lee had two options for action: retreat or try to attack the center of the U.S. Army on the Cemetery Ridge. The Southerners were to attack enemy positions on the morning of July 3rd from several directions. The Confederates launched an attack on the most fortified area of the Northerners' defenses across the open country, because of which they immediately began to suffer huge losses from rifle fire and artillery. Only a small part of the Southerners were able to get to the defensive positions of the enemy, but were almost immediately thrown back by a counterattack. In this offensive, the Confederates lost more than 6,000 soldiers without achieving any result. Having lost about 20,000 soldiers in 3 days, General Lee's army lost the opportunity to continue the offensive. The army of the Southerners was forced to retreat, but General Meade did not dare to pursue her, so his army also suffered serious losses. On July 3rd, after a long siege, the Vicksburg garrison was forced to capitulate. As a result, 25,000 soldiers of the Confederation were captured. In the state of Louisiana, the affairs of the Northerners also developed successfully. On July 8th, they managed to capture the city of Port Hudson. Thus, the U.S. Army managed to establish control over the entire Mississippi River Valley and divide the Confederation into two parts. Meanwhile, in the state of Tennessee, the Federal Army under the command of Rosecrans continued to push the troops of the Southerners. On September 20th, at the Battle of Chattanooga, the Southerners, having gathered their forces, were able to inflict a crushing defeat on the Rosecrans army, the remnants of which took up defensive positions in Chattanooga. In turn, the Southerners laid siege to the city, planning to force its garrison to capitulate. At the same time, the main forces of the Northerners under the command of General Meade began another campaign against the capital of the Confederation. Near Bristow Station, on October 14th, the Northerners were attacked by a Confederate army under the command of General Lee. The attack of the Southerners was unsuccessful and, having suffered serious losses, they were forced to retreat. On November 23rd, reinforcements sent by General Grant approached the besieged army of Rosecrans in Chattanooga. As a result of a bloody battle, the Northerners not only managed to unblock the city, but also defeated the Southerners and forced them to retreat. By the end of 1863, the Confederation had exhausted most of its economic and manpower reserves. Since the mobilization and economic potential of the Northerners was much higher, it became obvious that the Confederates would no longer be able to conduct offensive operations and they had to go on the defensive. In 1864, General Grant became the new commander of the U.S. Army, who developed his own plan of attack. According to this plan, General Sherman's army of 100,000 soldiers was to launch an offensive operation in the state of Georgia, while General Grant himself, at the head of the main forces, was to attack the main forces of the Confederates, led by General Lee. Also, the forces of the Northerners were to launch an offensive in Louisiana. On March 10, Northern troops under the command of General Banks launched offensives along the Red River, planning to cut Texas off from the rest of the Confederacy. At the initial stage, the offensive of the Northerners developed quite successfully, but on April 8, near the city of Mansfield, they were attacked and defeated by the Confederate Army. On May 4, an advancing Northern army of 118,000 soldiers under the command of General Grant clashed with a Confederate army of 60,000 soldiers under the command of General Lee. The battle took place in a dense forest. The Southerners were able to inflict significant damage on the Northerners, but were forced to retreat. The losses of the Northerners amounted to about 18,000 soldiers, while the Southerners lost no more than 8,000 soldiers. Despite the losses suffered, General Grant continued the offensive towards the city of Spotsylvania. On May 8, a new battle began near this city, which continued until May 19. The Northerners suffered serious losses, but failing to break the defenses of the Southerners retreated, planning to bypass their positions. Making a detour maneuver, the U.S. Army reached the outskirts of the city of Petersburg on June 9 and began its siege. Meanwhile, General Sherman's army was advancing on Atlanta. Using his numerical superiority over the Confederate army, Sherman successfully advanced deep into enemy territory. On June 27, a battle took place near Mount Kennesaw. The Northerners, counting on their numerical advantage, attacked the positions of the Confederates, commanded by General Johnston, head-on. The Confederates were able to inflict a serious defeat on the Northerners, but due to the numerical superiority of the enemy, they could not develop success. After some time, the Northerners were able to bypass the positions of the Southerners and, using their numerical advantage, continued the offensive on Atlanta. Already on September 2, the U.S. Army occupied the city of Atlanta, which had previously been abandoned by Confederate detachments. Not having sufficient forces to attack the Northerners, the Confederates tried to use maneuvers to distract them and prevent them from continuing their successful offensive. General Sherman did not pay attention to the actions of the Confederate Army, as he was well aware of its small size. Instead, on November 15, he began a march to the sea, as a result of which, on December 22, 1864, the U.S. Army reached the outskirts of the city of Savannah and occupied it. Meanwhile, the siege of Petersburg continued. By early 1865, General Grant commanded 115,000 soldiers, while General Lee commanded only 54,000 soldiers. On April 1, 1865, the Battle of Five Forks took place, during which the Confederate Army tried to stop the troops of the Northerners who were trying to surround the positions of the Southerners near Petersburg. The battle was unsuccessful for the Confederates, which is why General Lee decided to leave Petersburg. Already on April 2, the evacuation of Richmond began. The Northerners began to pursue the retreating enemy in an attempt to surround the remnants of the Confederate Army and force General Lee to capitulate. On April 9, the Northerners managed to surround the Confederate Army and deprive it of the ability to maneuver. General Lee was forced to surrender along with the remnants of the Confederate Army. On April 10, the Confederate government was arrested and the Confederate States of America effectively ceased to exist. Despite this, some detachments of the Confederation continued to resist. On May 12, the last battle of the Civil War took place. The Federal Army attacked the Confederate troops near the Palmetto Ranch. Despite the numerical advantage, the Federal detachments were defeated. Despite the success, further resistance of the Southerners was meaningless as the Confederation ceased to exist. Already on July 2, the last detachments of the Confederates ceased resistance and capitulated. This ended the American Civil War. If you like this video, Be sure to subscribe to my channel and click on the bell so as not to miss new videos.